Whether reason will prevail depends only partly upon us. We must hope and strive for the best. We must prepare for the worst.
Thanks for joining this episode of Clearer Than Truth. I'm Nathan Kiker. Our guest today is Judy Woodruff. Judy is a pioneering broadcast journalist whose career spans over 5 decades across NBC, CNN, and PBS. She's best known as the former anchor and managing editor of PBS NewsHour, where she became one of the first women to co-anchor a national nightly news broadcast and has covered every U.S. presidential election since 1976. Renowned for her integrity and incisive interviews, Woodruff continues to set the standard for serious, fair, and in-depth journalism. Before we jump into our interview with Judy, let's take a look at the news of today. The United States and China have agreed to a 90-day pause on tariffs, temporarily easing trade tensions and sparking a surge in financial markets. In Milwaukee, a devastating fire at an apartment complex has left 4 people dead and hundreds displaced, while in Georgia, a traffic stop led to a high-profile ICE detention of a college student. Internationally, Hamas has announced the imminent release of the last living American hostage in Gaza, and Pope Leo XIV, the first American pontiff, delivered his first Sunday blessing, calling for peace in Gaza and Ukraine. With that, let's jump into our interview with Judy. Judy, thanks for joining us.
I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah, you began your career in the 70s and witnessed a lot of seismic changes in journalism. What is it like being a reporter today compared to when you started?
It is completely different in every way you can imagine. When I started out as a reporter in 1970, working for a station in Atlanta, a TV station, the CBS affiliate in Atlanta, we were using film, which we had to process every day before we could get it on the air. That took about 40 minutes in the film processor. So there was no instant reporting or instant video of any kind. I worked for, as I mentioned, the CBS station in Atlanta. We had the 6 p.m. newscast and the 11 p.m. newscast. And that was it. And there were 2 deadlines a day. Eventually, more and more stations started doing news in the morning, but that wasn't even around then. And here we are, all these many, many years later, 50-some years later, news moves at the speed of light. The technology has completely changed. Film is in the distant past. So is video. Everything is digital. Everything is instantaneous. It's social media. Reporters today are expected to know everything in an instant and to be accurate. It's a completely different environment. Back then, those were the days of Walter Cronkite, Huntley Brinkley, where you expected to learn the facts from the newscasters and from reading your morning paper. Today, news is coming at us, information is coming from so many different sources. There's no way to shut it out. It's on our smartphones. It's, you turn on your laptop or your device, whatever, and news is coming at you from your Facebook feed. Your Aunt Tilly sent you a note. You're looking at TikTok. It's the technology. It's the business model is completely collapsed. As we know, newspapers and broadcast news has completely changed. It's cable news came on, and even that is now having its own identity crisis. So, and I would just say the other thing that's changed is today we're drenched in opinion rather than factual reporting. And so that's when I say I barely recognize today compared to yesterday when I started. I really mean it.
It seems that people are inundated with news. I, for example, in DC, often do watch PBS, which you worked for a long time, the PBS NewsHour, most nights when I'm trying to fall asleep. But I think I might be in the minority on that with people who are my age, 30 years old, because people all day long can see news on Instagram, on TikTok. Do you think there's an appetite for normal consumers of news anymore? And do you think that news actually sticks in someone's mind? It seems like right now that there's 30 stories a day and it's impossible to keep up.
Yeah, it is. And right now, especially with the Trump administration, with news coming at us by the hour, by the minute, and changing every day, It is harder to keep track of it all, including 4 reporters whose job it is to keep track. But I know there's an appetite for it because I hear from people all the time. I'm asked by people to explain what we're doing, to talk about the stories we're covering, the project I'm working on for the last almost 2.5 years, and I'll continue to work on this year, America at a Crossroads, trying to understand why we're so divided politically. I do think there's an appetite for this news. Do I think it's all 340 million Americans? No. The reality is that most people have to lead their lives. They've got to, hold down 2 or 3 jobs in a day, get children off to school, take care of just the daily needs of life, getting to and from work. So I don't expect everybody to be able to keep up with what's going on. But I think that clearly there is a significant contingent of Americans who still look to respected news media for information that they can count on. Now, we can talk about how that news is distorted. We can talk about separate sets of facts. But I know there's still a contingent out there, and I am constantly beating the drums for why that fact-based reporting is so important in our lives and in our democracy.
Why are facts so, it seems 20, 30 years ago, facts were universal and accepted. Why is that broken? Why can 2 different people have 2 different sets of facts today?
Well, a number of reasons. I mean, a lot of it has to do with the technology. Cable news came along, and in the beginning, I went to, and in fact, Ted Turner started CNN in 1980, and I joined CNN in 1993, and this was after the Gulf War, when it had really put CNN on the map as a place, a news organization that was prepared to go anywhere in the world to report the news immediately, as immediately as possible, to share it with the world. It was all about covering the news. But then along came competition in cable news, Fox News, MSNBC, and cable news became, I think, something different. It became a place to argue, to focus on the politics of what's going on as much as on the facts of what's going on. And so today, I think, sure, there's still great reporting going on cable, but so much of cable today is people sitting around arguing from different political perspectives. And meanwhile, so that happened. That was both a technological and a business model change. And meanwhile, the internet was roaring ahead. People could get news for free. They stopped subscribing to newspapers with the traditional advertising model. And they started getting their news from platforms that were, in some cases, not really well equipped to cover the news. And so those platforms started taking news from institutions like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the broadcast networks, the wires, the Associated Press. The news got filtered through those places. It got shortened. And then at some point along the way, and I'm condensing all this, Nathan, into a shorter answer, the premium became more and more on having an opinion. The news sort of, or I should say the factual basis for news lost its value. And there was just much more value placed on having an opinion and having a strong opinion and being able to argue that opinion, because that was more entertaining. It drew more clicks, more eyeballs. It's much more interesting to listen to an argument and watch people fight each other over something than it is to read a long paper explaining, okay, what's really behind trade policy these days? What's the status or the history of the wars in the Middle East? It's much easier to listen to a hot argument about it than it is to be educated. And it's not that news was perfect in the past. It wasn't. But there was more of a premium, I think, on information and on background. And that news is still around, or that information is still around, but it's harder to find it in the cacophony of noise and thousands of sources, and frankly now sources on different sides of the political aisle. People don't ever have to go to the same place for information. And that's why we're in such a tough spot right now.
But do you think people have the attention span anymore to actually digest news? Instagram and TikTok, even myself, who I try to be very conscious of the news and I try to read as much as I can, but it's hard to retain information right now.
You're right. That has been a casualty of our wonderful technological advances. We have these things now, the internet, social media, everything is now condensed to 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 8 seconds, 12 seconds, and that's it. And it's shortened our attention span. Even on the PBS NewsHour, we used to do segments that were 10, 12, 15 minutes long. And my segments for Crossroads still are longer than most. But in general, more of our segments are 5, 6, 7 minutes long because we realize that's how long people can, genuinely want to pay attention. It's not that there's no place for longer form journalism. It's just that there's less space for it. And if you want people to pay attention to a news development, to a story, to important information, you got to lure them in with a catchy 3, 4, 5 second or 12-second clip. You've got to make it quick. It's got to be either funny or catchy or a big question mark that's going to catch their attention. Then maybe you pull them in and you get them to read something a little bit longer and then a little bit longer. And that's what you got to do. I mean, we in the Newsmiss at the NewsHour, we are now focusing on, we have been for the last several years on TikTok, on promoting our work across the internet and across social media, Instagram, TikTok, you name it, Facebook, YouTube. I mean, we try to think about how do we condense longer pieces into shorter pieces that will catch people's attention.
How do you think President Trump is using people's shortened attention span to advance his agenda? It certainly seems he is.
I think he's a master at it. He figured out some time ago that this was the way to reach people. You saw the numbers of that the audiences were growing massively for TikTok, for Facebook, and he's learned how to take advantage of that. I will say at the same time, Nathan, though, that there is a bit of a pushback going on right now, or maybe more than a bit, in the form of podcasts like yours. I mean, there are now longer form platforms out there that are asking people to sit and listen for 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, even an hour to longer interviews, documentaries. So I think that clearly some Americans, some people around the world are insisting on more information, longer form, and maybe they don't want to read a long piece in an academic journal, but they would be interested in hearing an interview or an expository kind of piece or reporting on either on their iPhone, their smartphone, or looking on their tablet or smartphone. So I think I think the formula, the most pleasing formats are going to continue to evolve. We've got the shortest imaginable. You've got the crazy TikTok thing going. You've got podcasts. And I'm sure that in the years to come, we're talking in May of 2025, I'm sure that by 2027, 2030, there'll be other platforms out there that will be dispensing news in using video, using audio, using the written word. I looked at way down the road. I think at some point there'll be chips that will be implanted in people's heads, brains, earlobes, I don't know, that will give us news in an instant. And if we want more information, maybe we'll download a condensed form of it that only takes 2 seconds, but we'll have an hour's worth or a book's worth of information in our heads. I can't right now conceive of that, how that would work, but maybe that's where we're headed.
Do you think President Trump would have survived the scandals he's faced in a traditional news cycle that existed in, let's say, before 2016? I think about the fact that just this year, the things that he's taken on in the last year and a half, the indictments, Signalgate, the trade talks. I think most of the making money off of crypto, most of these things seem like they could have taken down a presidency if it was in the 90s or early 2000s. But I think because, to your point, people are inundated with news and access to information, no one can ever just sit there and think about one story for 3 days. I don't know if Watergate would have taken out Nixon in the current environment. Do you?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and it's a big question. I actually think there's more than technology involved in all this. I think we've come to a point in this country, and of course, Donald Trump is sui generis. We've never seen a president exactly like him, one who has adopted the different positions that he has, and who is, as if you will, in our face with his views, who's such a master of the media, who's really, really talented at getting himself out there and injecting himself into every news cycle. Almost, by the hour, he can inject himself into a story about sports. I mean, they announced recently that the NFL draft is going to be now held on the National Mall in Washington, a place we normally associated with the Smithsonian Institution, but now it's going to be the professional football draft. He's injected himself into the world of entertainment. He's talked about imposing tariffs on movies. He speaks up about pop music stars, not to mention every other aspect of life. So he's one of a kind, and I think his persona, who he is, the kinds of things that he does. And you mentioned some of the controversies surrounding him. I don't know that other presidents could have done the same things that he's done and survive politically. I think he is uniquely able to use media to overcome media, overcome the press. I mean, if you look at what the White House has done with the press corps and changing access, denying access to the Associated Press, which is the oldest, straightest news organization you can imagine, and then adding other news organizations because they are particularly friendly to this White House. It's a different climate. It's nothing like what we've seen before, and I think you have to put all that together. Along with the change in technologies, the platform, the speed of it, to understand why we are where we are.
Do you have any speculation as to why Democrats suck so much at competing in this space and why he's got it sort of
why Democrats aren't doing as well? Well, right now, I think Donald Trump, again, he's sui generis. I mean, he's one of a kind. He's been able to step in to our rapidly evolving media environment for all the reasons I described before. He's been able to step into that, quickly understand it, get on top of it, capitalize on it, and I think catch Democrats off guard. And I think that Democrats are still figuring out their voice, and I think a number of them have done that. A number of them are speaking out and stepping up. But it's as the case for every time a party is out of power, not just out of power in the White House, they're out of power in the U.S. Senate and in the U.S. House and in the United States Supreme Court. So they're in a minority position, and every time a party finds itself in this spot, they have a harder time finding their voice. I mean, this has been the case through American history. Right now, it is just, I think it's exacerbated because of our media environment. The fact that it's dominated by social media, dominated by the kind of technology that allows whoever has the biggest megaphone to dominate the airwaves, dominate social media. And it's just harder to break through. But I think as the election cycle evolves, we'll get closer to the midterms in November 2026. That's already heating up. We're going to truly see it heat up at the end of 2025, certainly by early 2026. You're going to hear more voices from the Democrats. Presidential candidates will eventually emerge on the part of the Democrats, and those voices will gain they'll gain more attention and more sunlight, if you will. Right now, President Trump is sort of the sun that's blocking out everything else because of his position in control of his party. And people who are loyal to him in control in the House and the Senate. And that makes it harder for the Democrats to have their voices heard.
You, of course, are working on a fantastic series, America at a Crossroads. What inspired you to undertake this project?
Because as I knew I was going to be stepping away from the anchor desk at the end of 2022, I knew I didn't want to stop reporting. I wanted to continue. And I thought about how can I make any contribution given what's going on? And the thing that hit me in the face, slapped me in the face, if you will, was how divided we are as a country. In all my years of covering American politics, and it was 50 years, I'd never seen the country so divided. And yes, I wasn't around during the Civil War, and I was alive during the Civil Rights Movement. I was certainly in the modern Civil Rights Movement. Certainly, I've covered aspects of that. Certainly, I've covered the disagreements over the Iraq War. I'd never seen us so divided, and especially so personally divided, where it's not just that we disagree, but we have such contempt for people on the other side. And I wanted to understand why that is. So I said, I want to spend the next 2 years traveling around America, talking to ordinary Americans about what is going on. Why are we so divided? How do you understand it, Mr. and Mrs. America? And why do you think the way you do about people? So that's what I've been doing for now. And we're in our third year. This year, I'm trying especially to focus on how do we bridge those divides, and how do we come together? How do we possibly come together when we are so divided and unfortunately, in such an ugly way? And that's the reporting I'm doing now on the NewsHour every other Wednesday night, America at a Crossroads.
Well, what are some of the most promising solutions to bridging our current divides? It seems like a lot of people think we can't.
There are a number of different ones. A few weeks ago, Nathan and I profiled something in Vermont. They have their own social media platform. It's called Front Porch Forum, which is a moderated forum which allows people to post, but what they post is moderated. You can say, I'm looking, where can I go to buy a lawnmower? Where do I go to find childcare? Here's what I think about a particular issue. I'd like to debate with somebody who disagrees with me, but it's moderated from the standpoint that people who are saying ugly things about people on the other side, that their content gets filtered out or taken down completely. And also misinformation is taken down. If somebody posts something that's false, that's taken down. So it works now in Vermont, and it's divided into 250 some different segments of the state, different neighborhoods, if you will. So you have to live in that area. You have to kind of know the area where you live, and it forces people to confront the people who live near them. So that's one thing we're doing. I'm also going to be talking to Tim Shriver, who's focused very much on something he calls the Dignity Index, which is all about measuring what people say, not so much by the content, but by the way they speak to and about the other person. Do they speak with respect, or do they speak with contempt? And he's got an index from 1 to 10. So I'm going to be talking to him. But we're looking at a number of different bridging groups all over America, trying to get people to sit down over a cup of coffee or over a beer to try to have a conversation from the right to the left. Let me understand where you're coming from. Where did you grow up? How did you develop this idea? Why do you think the way you do? So it hasn't really taken hold in Washington, D.C., but it is happening in small town and small neighborhood America, and even in some big cities. But it's one neighborhood at a time, one block at a time, and that's what we're trying to understand.
But do you think to bridge the divide nationally, social media companies have to be more aggressive in taking on misinformation? And do you have any reason to believe they would?
I do think they should be more aggressive. I don't understand. Right now we have an anything goes culture where you can post anything, you can say anything. I don't post very much online. But when I do, I see some nice comments, but I also see some incredibly ugly language being used. And so that's a disincentive to me to post. And I'm sure many Americans feel the same way. Others enjoy that. They get a big charge out of having a big argument and posting the nastiest thing they can think of to say about somebody else. And often it's anonymous. You don't have to say who you are. That's the other thing about Front Porch Forum in Vermont. You have to be who you say you are. You can't put up a false identity. I think the fact that people can post under somebody else's or some made up name and just Katie Bar I just think that's wrong, and I don't have a legal solution for it, but it's not healthy. It's certainly bad for our children who are just being introduced to social media, and what they're seeing is hurtful, painful, and to think that young kids that this is their first exposure to social life, that people can say the nastiest things about them and get away with it. Of course, it's a crisis. We've got to do something about that. And that's first and foremost. But I think beyond that, we need to do more.
Well, Judy, in the last week, and I'm not making this up, I've had 3 different people in the last week show me on their Instagram feed Hitler speeches that have been translated into English. It seems that this is not a platform that is going to self-regulate. I think that this very much is driving towards a deep divide and a deep polarization and deep racism. So it could be quite the undertaking.
Yeah, I'm not prepared to say where we draw the line, because I am a believer that we need to be able to hear history. We need to be able to understand what happened in history, whether it was Nazi Germany or Stalin or apartheid Africa or anything else. We need to know all that. We need to understand it. We need to hold it right there in front of us so that we don't have those things, so that we don't repeat that awful history. And we need to understand the history of this country. I mean, that to me, that's what has made the United States this, the beacon of the world, is because we do talk about our mistakes. We do let it hang out there. We have Watergate hearings and hearings to go over, whether it was, the House Un-American Activities Committee after the war in Vietnam. I mean, we need to air our dirty laundry, talk about it, and learn from it. So I'm not prepared to draw a line on what we see, but it needs to be put in context so that people don't look at that and think, oh, this is the majority view right now. I mean, showing a Hitler speech, people ought to be able to watch documentaries about what Adolf Hitler did and said, so that we don't have that happen again. But it needs to be in context, and people need to know what the arguments were on the other side.
Yeah. I have to ask this as well. When you were coming up in early journalism, most of the country still belonged to softball leagues, to churches, to choirs. No one does these things anymore. The closest thing I can think of in DC is a lot of my friends play in sports leagues, softball, stuff like that, kickball. But if you go anywhere in the country, no one actively has a social group during the week. And I am not the first to speculate it leads to a lot of issues, anger, loneliness, but I also think probably more divisive politics. Do you think that there's a future where these sort of civic institutions can come back, and do you think that would help bridge this divide? And have you seen any instances where it is coming back?
I do think it can come back. And by the way, people do belong to choirs in places where churches are active. I know of choirs. We've covered them in some of our reporting, so I know they exist. I'm sure you've heard of Robert Putnam.
Yep, that's Bowling Alone. I'm sort of
Bowling
referencing.
Alone. He forecast all this in the early 90s. He talked about how Americans were no longer joining bowling leagues, Kiwanis clubs, and the rest of it. And social media, or I should say media and then social media, has taken the place of that. People are doing a lot less than they used to do with other people. And of course, we know the pandemic of a few years ago made it even worse. People retreated into their home or their apartment or wherever they lived and they didn't have anything to do with people. And I think there's way too much damage that's been done by that. People are not going to the office even. They're not working from home. I understand why people need to do that for often for childcare reasons and commuting and all the rest of it. But we are social creatures, human beings are, and we need to be in contact with other human beings. And so Putnam followed up Bowling Alone with another book a few years ago called The Upswing, where he went back and looked at what happened in the early 20th century, or the end of the 19th, actually, the Gilded Age, and how the United States came out of that period. There was a progressive area. Without going into all that, based on that, he believes, and I interviewed him for my first piece for Crossroads this year, which I hope folks who are listening can go back and watch. He talked about how because the United States was able to come out of that Gilded Age where we were incredibly focused on who had wealth and celebrating wealth and forgetting people who didn't have anything, that we were able to come through that. And he said it was because people started at the grassroots level across America. They started to recognize that something was wrong, and they took it into their own hands. And he chapter and verse, he goes through this. So I recommend reading The Upswing, which is, well, first of all, read Bowling Alone, but then read The Upswing, and the work that Putnam continues to do today, looking at why Americans have the capacity in their homes, in our neighborhoods, down the street where you live, with your coworkers at work, with people you are in a neighborhood chat with. Get those people together, go bowling, go start a singing group, have a beer together. It can happen, and people have the capacity to do it at the local level. Don't wait for Washington, is his message. If we all sit around and think, there's going to be some great blinding light that comes out of Washington, D.C. that leads us in the right direction, and I happen to believe this too, it's not going to come from the nation's capital. It's going to come from many, many, many different Americans, communities, taking this thing into our own hands and figuring out how do we work our way through it.
Okay. Well, Judy, I want to be respectful of your time. You've generously given me 30 minutes. Thank you so much for taking the time. For our listeners, they can, of course, still follow your series at America at a Crossroads, but any other place they can follow your work?
Well, no, that's it. Right now it's PBS NewsHour, and you can go online, newshour.org/ pbs.org/newshour. I got it backwards. pbs.org/newshour. But we are on YouTube. Just look for America at a Crossroads on YouTube, as well as on the NewsHour website.
Wonderful.
But that's the place to go, and we're working on TikTok and everything else.
Thanks again for tuning in to this episode of Clearer Than Truth. Join us next time.